Okay, so I'm going to get started with just some opening remarks, and then hopefully the others that have registered will join in as we go. So I'll just start by thanking everybody for attending our CFWF webinar with registered dietitian Jane Dummer. Hi, Jane. My name is Rachel Telford. For those that don't know me, I am the president of the Eastern Canada Farm Riders Association and co-chair of the CFWF Windsor Conference. Was CFWF 2020, but as many of you know, was postponed to 2021. I'm going to be moderating the session today. Norma Tolhurst from the CFWF office is our technical host today, and I want to thank her for doing all of the behind the scenes work for making this webinar happen today. So thank you to Norma. This is the second webinar planned by ECFWA as a way to offer our CFWF colleagues some professional development content, since we are unable to host that national conference this September due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a big disappointment to us, and we look forward, hopefully, to being able to welcome you all to Windsor next year in 2021. As you may have known, the theme for our conference is risky business, and we are going to continue with that theme. It's more relevant than ever now with the pandemic. We all know that there's so many different ways in which agriculture is a risky business, and Jane originally developed a presentation that she was hoping to be able to do at our conference around sort of risky new food opportunities that Canadian consumers were interested in and what that means for farmers in the agriculture industry. She's still going to discuss some of that today, but Jane has expanded her presentation to explore some of the consumer trends that we've seen pop up during the pandemic. You know, more baking, more people eating at home, and is that going to have a lasting impact on our agriculture industry? During Jane's presentation, there is going to be a few poll questions, and I hope that everybody participates in those questions, just so that we do get that sort of feedback to Jane that she's looking for. And there is going to be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free along the way, if you don't want to forget your questions, just type them in the chat feature, and we'll keep track of them there, and I can ask them at the end on your behalf. Or if you want, we will open it up for people to be able to ask at the end of the session directly to Jane yourself, and maybe facilitate a little bit of a discussion at the end of the presentation. For now, though, please remember to keep your microphones on mute, otherwise Norma will do it for you. We don't want to have any background interruptions if we can avoid it. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Jane now. Welcome, Jane, and thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. And yeah, this has been a long talk or long discussion for this presentation. As you mentioned, originally I was going to be in person in Windsor, and then modified it to a webinar, and then modified the topic. So I'm looking forward to being with you for about the next hour. And as Rachel mentioned, please, any questions along the way, please put them into the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. So yeah, let's get started. So this is the agenda for today. So how has COVID changed consumers' behaviors and dietary patterns? And this was obviously added after the pandemic happened and the in-person conference was canceled. And so I'll be talking a little bit about what was happening early pandemic, what was happening mid-pandemic, and what is happening post-quarantine. We're still in a pandemic, so we'll talk a little bit about consumers' behavior and dietary patterns for the future. And of course, nobody knows the future, but from what we've seen so far, what I imagine will be happening. Then I'll talk a little bit about health through food and beverage choices, and so improving health. Out of the pandemic, real concern around immune health and digestive health has been on the forefront, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the original topic, so risky business and risky business wellness products. So all of these products here have a pro and a con. So organic wines, hard cider, cannabis, and spirits. So as much as there can be health and positive attributes, there also can be addictive attributes. And so, we talk a little bit about what the attributes are in general, and then the attributes due to COVID. And so that's, again, the original topic. I was going to talk about in person. And then the last point is how farmers can realize increased sustainability by responding to the consumer's new interests. And so this is a bit of a moving target, as I mentioned earlier, about consumers' behavior and consumer spending and different tariffs and fragile borders and so much happening with this health crisis. But we'll look at some overall general ideas of how farmers can pivot and react to the consumer's new interests. So this is just a bit of I've been in the industry for over 20 years and working across North America. I am a dietitian, however, I am a business person too. So, but I did graduate from University of Guelph, which I'm sure there are a lot of alumni on the call, and still carry my credentials as a registered dietitian. Over 20 years in the industry, from farm to retail, and I have worked on over 60 projects in my career, basically from the pod to the plate. So first up, poll, please. So first question, where are you located? And so it's Eastern Canada, Ontario, Prairies, Alberta, or British Columbia. And do you live on a farm or in a rural area? So you'll notice in the new text box, there's 2 questions and there's a third question you can't see. I only want you to actually answer the first 2 questions. So just to give me an understanding where you're dialing in from, where you're logging in from, it will be helpful for me. So I see that we've got about 3 out of 29 voted. So if I could get people to vote, that would be terrific.
So I'm not sure if anybody else is having this issue. I can't hit submit unless I answer the other questions.
Oh, is that so? Okay. Then if you're running into technical problems, answer everything. So the third question, did you increase baking at home during COVID, especially during the lockdown orders from March to June, because we're reopening now, depending on where you are in the country, but we're definitely reopening. So really looking at that time frame from March to June. And then did your baked goods include any of the ingredients we'll be talking about today? So either cannabis or alcohol. So, all right, 25 out of 29, we're almost done.
And it's anonymous, so
it is anonymous. Yeah, I just know numbers. I don't know people.
We don't want anybody to feel like they're going to get in trouble on some of their answers.
All right, so maybe another 10 seconds and we'll end the polling. Okay, so I'm going to end it and we'll see what we came up with. So audience, 8% out of Eastern Canada, 52% out of Ontario, 28% out of the Prairies, 4% out of Alberta, and 8% out of British Columbia. Majority, I live on a farm or in a rural area, so 64% versus 36%. And then did you increase your baking during the COVID pandemic lockdown orders? And 52% yes, 48% no. And then did you include any ingredients like cannabis or alcohol? 8% said yes, and 92% said no. So great, thank you for that. And it's good to see that we have a representation across the entire country. That's excellent. Thank you for joining on the different time zones too. Okay. All right, so the power of of the global pandemic. So this is a health crisis that has given us a financial crisis. It's unlike anything I've ever seen, and the majority of people, have ever seen. So consumer behavior from when the pandemic first happened, and people were buying flour, were buying baking yeast, were buying toilet paper, and they were hoarding it. I was in my local grocery store, and industrial size flour is on sale for like $6.99. So obviously that habit has changed when people have gotten back to not being locked down, and things are reopening and they're going back to office spaces. They just don't have the time to experiment baking. But it really interesting consumer behavior that if you had asked me in September, would we have run out of baking yeast, flour, and toilet paper in a pandemic? I probably would have said no, especially because originally the COVID-19 was really coined or really identified as only respiratory and not gastrointestinal. So, but this is the consumer behavior, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The changing trends. So when I was talking to media and preparing for CL Canada, I'm the health expert at CL, which has been postponed twice and is now 100% virtual. I was talking a lot about health tribes and the keto diet and other types of consumer diet trends. And once COVID hit, people really were looking at comfort food. Obviously, they were baking, they were looking at maybe high sugar or higher fat. And so things changed quite drastically. Certainly people who followed a vegan diet as not as a cult thing, but a cultural thing, that didn't change for them. But people who were doing it more as a tribe, it did change. So just where I was looking at for my business and trends, I had to keep my eye on what was going on and what was happening in that area. Dietary patterns, again, same thing that I just mentioned. So people at the beginning were looking at comfort food, and now they're looking at more health promoting foods. So, and certainly in our country, because we're, we have the opportunity for food banks and for a socialized system, but in countries where there's such an economic disadvantage, quite concerned about what the global pandemic is doing to those countries and the population within those countries. And then food supply and trade. So originally when everything stopped, there was an incredible piece with the food supply, and now we're seeing trade, different tariffs. We're seeing people wanting to purchase ingredients closer to home. And are the farmers ready for that? Like, are they are our crops ready for that? Can they be diverted? And what is the cost of that? So yeah, it's been such a change since March. It's incredible. Looking at the consumer behavior changes. So at the beginning, it was fear and anxiety. So that panic buying, and until retailers got it together, people were hoarding, so they weren't limiting product, and that was, they didn't, for the first week, 10 days, systems weren't in place, and that was a bit unfortunate, but limit on certain foods, so that was helpful. Once we've got now the shift back to in stores with the reopening, people are still doing some online buying, but people are getting back into the stores. It's just a different cadence. So for instance, if you were a shopper that shopped 3 different grocery stores, you may only be shopping one grocery store now, because the ability to go pick up just one ingredient is not as easy as it used to be. So you might have used one store just kind of as a corner store or discount store just to pick up 1 or 2 or 3 of those ingredients. But because there are still social distancing and lineups and store limits of people in the store, people are back shopping in person, but just again at a different cadence. Health is emerging as a key investment, and I mean that's good for me as a health professional to hear. And we had that prior to COVID. for sure. But since this is a global health crisis, then health is top of mind. The common person is using the word antibiotics or antibodies. They're using the term, just terms that they had never used before. So I believe we'll be in health as a key investment, at least for another 2 years. And then we'll see how it goes after that. But I really believe anybody in the food space who's not identifying health as an emerging key investment is losing opportunity right now. And consumers want local. So not only consumers want local, but when I've been dealing with my B2B clients who are in Canada, they want local ingredients too. So, I had a client at the beginning of the lockdown and they were getting amaranth from India. And, obviously there was concerns and with that supply, with the borders being closed and then fragile reopening. So not only consumers, but other businesses do want local plus sustainability. So, that movement was definitely a trend prior to COVID, but it's even more applicable now. So changes in the dietary patterns. So looking at early lockdown, and it was snacking more. People had a desire for comfort food. So I did a podcast with the American Baking Association, and Google searches for how to make cinnamon buns, how to make banana bread, how to make a sourdough starter. Everybody had a sourdough starter going, and so there was definitely a movement towards more comfort food, and we saw increasing baking at home. So bread machines were flying off the virtual shelves, even pizza ovens. So they had there was an increase in sales in at home pizza ovens. So increase at home at baking and cooking. And that, I would say, that was definitely for the first 4 to 6 weeks. And then people were also interested in the wellness products. So vitamin C, vitamin D were flying again off the virtual shelves. Unfortunately, some companies were capitalizing on this fear and, making false claims. It's been interesting to watch companies that are obviously losing their business based on such false claims. But people were interested, and they're still interested in wellness products. And now post-lockdown, so we're obviously opening up across the country. We're getting back to doing some gatherings, some in-person stuff. And so people are now really looking at, well, how do I keep my immune and digestive health supported? What about my mental health? So there's been a lot of concern about the lockdown and how it has affected people's mental health through isolation, family life. Maybe your family life was a bit dysfunctional prior to the lockdown, and then you're locked down and you realize how dysfunctional it was. And so, that can lead to some, increase in mental health conditions. So people are looking for food and beverages to help with that. And then a continued interest in healing, what has come out as almost healing foods or wellness foods. And prior to COVID, I didn't hear the term as much about healing, and I'm hearing that more as a marketing term right now. Just a couple stats for you regarding the trend for health. So if I go to the US, they conduct their 2020 health survey, and they did ask some questions regarding the pandemic. And consumers in the US did find that 20% were eating healthier than usual. And I would apply that to Canada, and maybe even not larger than that, maybe 30% of consumers were eating more healthier than usual, or healthier than usual. And then a US grocery shopper trend was identifying that, again, 36% of the consumers were looking and felt that they were eating healthier. They identify younger consumers were placing an emphasis on a healthier body, staying at home. So fitness at home as well. But overall cohorts from basically Zeds, like Generation Zeds to Boomers, were definitely eating healthier or try to eat healthier post that baking comfort food situation within the first few weeks. So health as a key trend and investment. So these are the three categories that we're really looking at. We're looking at immune health because right now we don't have a ideal treatment plan for COVID. We don't have a vaccine, but we're learning as we go because we haven't had COVID-19 in a human population. We don't know what to do, and so people are trying to maintain their health as much as possible. So if they are exposed to it, that they can fight it off, or that they don't get severe symptoms. Digestive health is another area that was a trend prior to COVID, but it's certainly because our digestive health is related to our immune health, people have a real interest in that, and industry has had a real interest in digestive health over the past decade. And mental health, I would say, especially for cannabis, it's an area that COVID has really shone a light on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. So certainly looking at where are the opportunities within improving your health through food and beverage choices. And so with immune health, and I was looking, at our crops in Canada. So certainly pulses, seeds, all fruits and vegetables because of their vitamin and mineral content, but I did pick apples, pears, and sweet potatoes. And so when we're looking at immune health, we want to look at support and maintenance. As soon as you start saying immune boosting, you're kind of getting into a claim. You have to be careful around what you're promising and what you're claiming. But again, the vitamins and minerals will help support our immune system and keep it strong to fight off infections and viruses such as COVID-19. Digestive health, as I mentioned, so the gut microbiome has become a very popular term. We've known about the biome for over 30, 40 years, but actually understanding how it interacts with our immune system has probably been a real emerging research in the past decade. And so what crops, looking at probably, again, all grains, but I did identify barley, oats, wheat, apples, fiber. We've been talking fiber for years. And so, if you've got increasing your gut transit time through insoluble fiber or soluble fiber for more of your heart health, but definitely having enough fiber in your diet to support your digestive health, and pre and probiotics. So probiotics come usually plant-based ingredients, and probiotics are, again, microbes that help increase the good bacteria or give you a better bacteria in your gut. And we often find that in dairy products, although we've seen a lot more in the past probably 2-3 years, shelf-stable probiotics. So we've seen it in foods like cereals and crackers and cookies. And then I mentioned the mental health earlier. So stress and anxiety, especially with the lockdown, people weren't used to adapting. If people were in jobs that it was pretty much Groundhog Day every day, and then all of a sudden, they're flung into working at a home. There's uncertainty in the future. There's uncertainty, not only with their job, but globally. It's going to create a lot of stress and anxiety. And as I mentioned too, if it was a dysfunctional family environment prior to this, then, that's not a great situation to be in 24/7. So we've seen a lot more attention shown on mental health. And within our crops, definitely the pulses and the seeds, some of the whole grains for sure. And I put salmon in there. Salmon, we've been studying for years about the link of the omegas and mental health. So poll time. has the pandemic increased your own awareness of immune health? Just yes or no. And then have you made direct healthier choices to your eating patterns? And just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box so Rachel can help me moderate them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I've got 24 out of 25 out of 32, so a couple more seconds for everyone to vote. Okay, so 10 more seconds. I've got 28 out of 32, and then we'll end the polling. Oh, one more. Good, thank you. All right, so we'll end the polling and we'll share the results. So has the pandemic increased your own awareness of immune health? So 41% says yes, 59% says no. And then have you made direct healthier choices to your eating habits due to the pandemic? So 34. So that's within the definite research that I've been finding. So anywhere between like 20% to 36% have been making healthier choices. So you're 34%. So that's great to see. And then 66% said no, no direct healthier choices. Good. Thank you for participating in that. So getting back to the original topic and the risky business wellness products. So when I was talking to the organizers originally, because the theme was risky business, and we thought, okay, let's look at these products that do have some health benefits. They do have attributes to them that are positive, but there's also a risky side to it. So whether it's addiction or government regulations, not making it easy to trade these type of products even within our own country. So yeah, we said, okay, let's divide that up. So for the first two, I call them ferments, but organic wines and hard ciders. And then I'll talk a little bit about cannabis and spirits as well. So organics have come in, have increased in consumers' eyes. And now with the transparency, people want to know where their food is coming from more than ever, and how their food is treated. So that's what we have found during COVID and post-COVID. So there's opportunities in local, sustainable, and ready to drink. That ready to drink does come from the whole idea about how COVID is transferred and how we catch COVID. So if people have individual ready to serve opportunities to package, even though single serve was a bad term prior to COVID, people are more open to that ready to drink, ready to serve, individual servings. I know any events I've been at where we're gathering like 10 people or whatever, I sometimes bring my own cup, my own glass. And even like I was at an event on the weekend and there was 6 of us and she had individual servings of potato chips because two of the people I didn't know and I didn't want to be sharing a bowl with somebody who I had no idea who they were and that. So I mean, this is a hypersensitivity right now. I don't know where that's going to be 2 years from now, but definitely right now people are looking for that. So getting back to the organic, sustainability has been a concern for a while. Organics have been increasing for a while. However, with COVID and people looking at how organic wine is prepared and grown, there may be an increase and focus on that. Consumers will continue to search for authenticity, and they want to improve their knowledge about subjects. So I found it really interesting because earlier in my career, I taught for 10 years on food safety with experts at the Well Food Technology Center, and I taught it across Canada. And I'm in the grocery store, and somebody's telling me, what I should be doing in the grocery store, and so I'm finding, I guess, with the illusion of knowledge, with the internet, and with maybe so much time on people's hands, consumers are really looking to improve their knowledge, but they're also there's a lot of experts out there that maybe aren't experts. So I think it's really important to get the right information out about organics and what organics means to the consumer. Just some data that I thought I'd share with you. So according to a 2019 report by Manitoba Agriculture and the Canadian Organic Trade Association, Canada grew approximately almost 600 hectares of organic grapes in 2017, but only about 5% of the total grape crop. However, the largest regions for the organic grape growing are British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. And as according to that same report, LCBO sales of organic wine doubled between 2010 and 2014. And I think that would be even, again, higher today in 2020. And then with the Quebec SAQ, organic alcohol sales reached 97 million in 2017. And again, both would be higher today. So we'll leave the organic wine for now, and then we'll get into hard cider. So naturally gluten-free, and that was obviously a dietary pattern piece where hard ciders were fitting in compared to a lot of beers. So our typical Canadian go-to beer does contain gluten. So we saw an increase of hard ciders over the past 5 years in our country, especially. Craft ciders are popping up all over Canada, and again, really competing on a world-class level. And then the craft cider versus the other kind of pedestrian ciders that we see, although more craft ciders are in the LCBO, but the craft ciders are seen as a premium product, and definitely looking for local production and authentic experiences. And certainly because of COVID and the lack of our experience or opportunity to travel internationally, people are really looking for those authentic experiences. And so again, as we open up, as restrictions become less restrictive, it's, I think, a very good opportunity for ciders to flourish in this situation. This Euromonitor International data was pre-COVID, but again, you can see the growth of what is predicted for 2022 within retails, and that is craft and pedestrian ciders, or kind of the mass ciders that we would find cheap and cheerful at the LCPO. But again, a real curve for sure. And now moving on to the cannabis edibles and drinkables. So the legal market has been in place for about a year. There is concern regarding the black market still having an edge over the legal market. I'm not going to get into that too much. If there's any questions at the end, and I can address that, that's fine. But based on this Mantel report, and again, it was pre-COVID, February 25th, cannabis products primarily serve as health and wellness needs. So more than half, so 62%, used it as to relax, 54 relieve stress and anxiety. Meanwhile, others used it for sleep and to improve their mood. So it was definitely, and it is still definitely seen as a wellness product. However, many Canadians view it as a complex and intimidating ingredient, or an intimidating crop. And so then the lack of understanding may lead to people avoiding it entirely. And when I have written about this prior, or talked about it prior, There is a lot of concern about how people will react, especially new users. So a potential user or a new user who has not used it, there is a concern about how much of an edible can I eat before, and then how long do I need to wait to drive or to do something that would include motor skill and reaction time. And so that's one of the intimidating factors that we don't have a lot of data on. And so factual statements to help educate and familiarize potential consumers with the cannabis is a good way to introduce it and establish it. So I definitely think there is opportunity, but I also think there's definitely opportunity to have the education around it, and looking at overall 66% of open non-users are interested in ingestibles. So again, thinking there's opportunity, but definitely doing some market research ahead of time before you go in 100% with that. Okay, and so emerging research has identified cannabis active compounds such as CBD as a potential adjunct treatment for infections from novel coronavirus. So this is pretty exciting research. It's emerging right now. Like there's no protocol. There's no what does the treatment look like. There's just potential at this point. And so the study was conducted by University of Nebraska researchers there and the Texas Biomedical Research Institute, to looking at preliminary evidence that the anti-inflammatory properties of especially CBD, so the non-THC components within cannabis, can fight against COVID-19 induced inflammation and in patients' lungs. So again, very preliminary. We don't have a protocol set on how this treatment would look, but it is interesting. And because right now the anti-inflammatories that they're using for the COVID patients have extreme side effects. And so, you're treating one, but you're treating your respiratory system, but you may be interfering with another system with the current drugs because they are so potent. So, but in addition to reducing the cytokines, CBD had other reduction of other inflammatory byproducts, including interleukin-2. So interesting research, definitely not, we need clinical trials on this, and everything is so new at this point, but I just thought I'd mention that because it's a really interesting piece. All right, so local spirits. So getting into the distillery side of things, and again, I talked a little bit about having addiction, having regulatory, having even prohibition against this type of product in the past, and with prohibition in the past. But looking at what are the craft spirits? What's happening in Canada with our craft spirits? So although there's no formal definition of craft spirits in Canada, most distilleries are independently owned and producing in small batches. It's very similar to craft breweries and craft cideries. They're tapping into the local movement and increased a consumer desire to understand the origins of the product. So really an interesting opportunity, probably not a huge volume for crops, but an added value for the crop, definitely. Premium products definitely are a trend coming out of 2019, and even within COVID, people are looking at how they're spending their money, and if they're going to spend their money, they might look at a premium product versus kind of a mass product. And so there is research suggesting that premium and above spirits are forecast to increase their global volume market by 13% by 2014, as consumers continue to favor quality over quantity. So it is a certain niche market, and definitely looking at that. But if you can get a higher price, then it may make sense to go into this area. And if you're going to get a higher price for a lower quantity, then why not do that? And I just give an example here because I thought the name was really interesting, Stumbletown Distillery. And because we have purple wheat and within the prairies, and it's a crop that I thought would have had more traction. Perhaps it's because it's wheat and it's not gluten-free. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring this up because it uses unique local ingredients to push the envelope while staying true to the tradition of artisan spirits. And then definitely they're looking at embracing the location in Saskatoon and taking advantage of the fresh premium ingredients. So now that we're in a reopening, the distillery is now open, you can go there, you can sample it, you can buy it. It's, again, the experience that we're craving because we haven't had a lot of outside experiences, in-person experiences. We've had mixed reality experiences or virtual experiences, but the opportunity to go to a distillery, hear about the story, hear about the brand, people are craving that right now. So another quick poll, risky business wellness products. So out of the 4 categories of wellness products, which one do you believe is the riskiest? So if I could get you to answer that, that would be terrific. Okay, so we're at 23 out of 31, 24. Okay, maybe about 10 more seconds for everyone to answer. Good, we're getting almost 90% have voted.
Jane, there's just a question. Is it risky from the consumer perspective or the grower perspective that you're asking this question?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking more from the grower because you're farm riders, but it is a good question. But I was thinking from the grower. All right, so 93% have voted. I'll end the poll and share the results. Right, so we've got a lead with cannabis at 66%, then spirits at 17%, organic wine close behind at 14%, and then hard cider at only 3%. So I agree with the cannabis. I agree, you know, there's 2 different markets. There's a legal market and a black market. How will people respond to different types of beverages and edibles, food? So there's a lot. I agree with that. So and I would say you're definitely within the trend. Ciders, the only concern about ciders is the market in the US is not growing as quickly as Canadian market, but you know, if you've got a small craft cidery, you may not have the volume to service the US anyway. So very good, thank you for doing that. And then once we get back to the slides, then we'll just finish up with how farmers can take advantage of this. There we go. Okay, so up until early 2020, as we all know, consumers and things were kind of going along as normal. They were spending on food, was pretty stable, growing about 4% over the previous 5 years. But then the global pandemic created instability and uncertainty. We're not quite sure how consumers will continue to change their patterns, but we know that there's short-term and permanent changes in not only trade patterns, as I mentioned about that client no longer wanting to source amaranth from India, but consumer spending. So we know consumers are still a little leery about going out to restaurants to eat. We know most of them are respecting gathering restrictions, so not gathering more than 10, 25, 50 people, depending on what the situation is and the location. So it's important, like what we used to look at as stable and what we're talking about, what had not really changed in the past 5 years, it seems it's changing probably every month at this point, and it should stabilize slightly, but again, we don't know for sure, especially if there is a second wave within our country. So what can farmers do? So when I say increase domestic crops, I mean what already is flying off the shelves here domestically. So, if wheat is, one of your big crops and your biggest customer is Canada, then like, do you just increase that? Do you change crops to meet the needs that people don't want to import certain ingredients or crops anymore? I would say there's opportunity there, but definitely they need to do the research and look at that. And then we all know, again, transitioning to an organic crop takes up to 3 years, but there are companies. I was talking to the Annex group with Arden Mills, and they were actually paying some farmers during transition. So they had products that were called transitional. So you weren't losing money within that time period. So things to look at and also to research. And recognize the secondary and value added uses. And for example, the purple wheat vodka. So, if you can get a premium price for a small quantity of crop, does that not make sense to look at that, at least research that? People still want convenience. However, new habits from the health crisis, consumers will gravitate towards portable and food safety. So I talked a little bit of that in like a wine drinking box, and we used to poo-poo that before, but now consumers may be looking at that. So ready to serve, ready to drink products. And then premium pricing. So now that consumers understand the food insecurity, the fragile borders, where the food was coming from, they may look at, okay, we'll pay more if this is going to support our country, if it's going to support symbolic and job sustaining producers. So that's yet to be seen. We've all done research where consumers say one thing, but when they get to the store, they do exactly another thing. So time will tell with that, but it's an important piece to look at. And so this is just to summarize before we get into the questions for the next 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. So COVID-19 definitely did influence our consumer behaviors and dietary patterns. And within the first 6 weeks of identifying it was a global pandemic, it was that panic buying, it was baking from home, it was comfort foods, and then it was a shift definitely to looking at improving health through food and beverage choices. And what does that look like? So looking at digestive health, looking at immune health, looking at mental health. And then what we wrapped up, or what we looked at with the 4 wellness products within risky business. So the cider industry is booming in Canada. Definitely looking at organics, organic wine, looking at the cannabis industry as a whole. It doesn't make sense to go there. And then finally the spirits, and looking at craft spirits. And then how did the farmers respond? And it's a little tricky right now because this is unprecedented. We have not had a health crisis that has led to such disruption with globally. So we've had individual health crises in different continents, but not so globally, and not resulting in financial woes across the globe. So, giving you some definite ideas there, but it's really, it is kind of week to week to look at what's happening. All right, so we'd be open for questions now, Rachel, if you want to.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to start with one that came to me sort of from the beginning, where you said that people are using health terms in this pandemic, but do they actually understand the terms that they're using, or do they just think that they have this vague concept that they're that they've read it on Twitter or they've read it on Facebook, so they know what they're talking about?
Yeah, I would say there's opportunity to educate for sure. So people are talking about antibodies, people are talking about immune boosting, people are talking about things. And this illusion of knowledge is not actually new since we've had the internet, and a certain cohort of people who just look at the internet and become an expert on things. But I would say, there are some people who are educating themselves through proper channels and not social media channels or celebrity information. So, but there is more and more opportunity to educate around that and get the information out that's helpful and not fear mongering.
I think that leads into a question that I don't know if Trish Jordan meant it to be a question for you, but why are people choosing, for example, organic wine or alcohol when, by the end product, it doesn't really matter that, the ingredients that went into it were organic. So does that sort of, I guess, speak to those health tribes that you're talking about, that people are just so ingrained in wanting to follow whatever that edict was, whether that's organic or vegan?
Yeah, I mean, there was a big misconception with one study where organic people who were looking for organic alcohol or wine felt that there were no sulfites in organic wine, which is incorrect. So I believe it is partially a choice to follow that type of dietary pattern and maybe even tribal with the organic. However, if people are willing to pay more for that, and they're, you can give them the experience and tell them like how things are done with the actual ingredients, with the actual grapes, and then through the processing techniques on how it is organic processing techniques, that, might be enough to support what they're looking for.
And there was a lot of good chat actually happening while you were talking in terms of, healthy eating habits and how they've changed. And I admitted that, I tried to be healthy, but the Oreos get me every time. So, I guess from your perspective as a health professional, have you seen, I guess, anything in this that I guess would speak to people had best of intentions, but slowly we'll go back to our old habits?
Yeah, my from my experience and from my background, and never been through a global pandemic before, but I would say definitely this next year, it will be top of mind, depending on how things shake out at the early 2021 to mid 2021. People may go back to old habits, but we're definitely seeing a trend. Like I know in the UK, part of their government is looking at how to reduce childhood obesity, and that was actually before COVID, and so they're carrying on with government initiatives of helping companies to make better make better foods so people can make better choices, because not everyone's going to be cooking from home, and we've already seen that, as I mentioned, the industrial size flour for $6.99 on sale. They can't get rid of the skid in the middle of the grocery store, and just 4 months ago you couldn't even find flour. So and certain younger cohorts of shoppers are pretty fickle, and so we've seen that in the past. So yeah, I would say for the next year, definitely we're going to see it. But after that, I couldn't look into the crystal ball.
And that also speaks to a question from Jennifer Mitchell from Ontario Bean Growers. And she said that as an organization, they're wondering how do they prevent beans as being known as simply a pandemic food? Now that they have them, sitting there in their pantry, and if they didn't actually use them in the last couple of months, will they actually use them, or are they just going to sit there? And how do they actually, I guess, encourage people to use it? And so from your perspective as a health, in the health field, what, I guess.
I was never really a fan of that pandemic cookbook or how to cook through the pandemic. And I saw a lot of social media about that. And I personally and professionally, I wasn't a fan of that approach because it's limiting. There's a lot of interest in plant-based protein. And so that has not changed. In fact, with the sustainability and questions around sustainability, because we saw, again, fragile ingredients and ingredients we couldn't get, people are more interested in Canadian products. And so if those beans are Canadian grown, I would look at the Canadian grown aspect, as well as the plant-based protein. Beans have had a bad name since World War II, right? So like, I mean, after World War II, people could buy a side of beef and put it in their freezer, and beans were seen as an economical thing you picked up at the food bank. So they've had challenges for years. Sorry about that, bean people, but it's kind of the facts. But we're seeing a shift for that sustainability. So a Canadian grown product and that plant-based protein.
Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask Jane directly? If so, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, we're pretty good with time, right? It's like it's 1 minute left, but yeah, any questions, I'm open to answering them.
And then if not, I guess I could ask another question in terms of just if, you know, we're all hearing about this second wave coming of the pandemic, right? And some have already suspect that maybe in certain areas they're already seeing that second wave. So, you know, from your perspective, when you're moderating, when you're analyzing the trends, you know, do you think that there's going to be sort of a recurrence of these same themes again? Or do you think that maybe we'll sort of delve into, you know, new areas that we haven't been to?
Yeah, I don't think we'll see that panic buying. I think, as I mentioned earlier, people's shopping habits have changed, and there's a different cadence for sure. I think people will be open to, you know, locking down again if they need to. They'll probably go back to more online buying. You know, maybe they'll go back to a few of their recipes that worked. I heard a lot of bread recipes ended up in the garbage because people had never, you know, never baked before, and all of a sudden they're baking bread. But certainly, I think it will be a modified approach. I'm hoping that there won't be that level of panic behavior.
All right, if there's, I don't see anybody unmuting, and I don't see any other questions in the chat. So that being said, I think it's great to be able to wrap up on time. We were trying to keep it to an hour. I do want to mention to everybody, though, that our next CFW event is going to be our awards presentation that takes place on Thursday, September 24th at 8 p.m. So please watch your emails for more details on that so that we can all join together to celebrate the excellence in our journalism and communications across the province. So thank you, Jane, and thank you to everybody for joining in on our webinar today. I think it was
Rachel. Opportunity. If there's any further questions or people want to get a hold of me, the slide's up right now for my contact. Oh, that my phone number's not right. Geez, it's been a couple crazy months, but anyway, 519-716-4755 is my phone number. If people need to get a hold of me for any reason, or you want to email me some questions, that's my email. But certainly, it's been a pleasure facilitating this webinar for your group today.
Thanks, everybody.